First off, I just want to say thank you to everyone that came out here tonight, and also thank you to all of my fellow young men who have helped me. And as many of you know, I'm a huge Alabama fan. And I play football, and I'm currently heading into my senior season at Lawrence County. I would love to go to Alabama and play, but that's most likely not going to happen, and that's also besides the point. A few years ago, I went to one of Nick Saban's accounts, and a quote that he said that really stuck out to me was, "With every thank you, there is an I owe you behind it." What does this mean to us as a church? I'm reminded of a song with the verse, "He paid a debt he did not owe, I owed a debt I could not pay." Remember that one? We just sung it, so you should. Jesus died for us, and we thank him for that in our daily prayers. But what do we owe him? Or what is our debt to him? We owe him many things, but one of the greatest is love. Love is one debt that you will always owe and never be able to fully pay off. You'll never reach the place in life where you can say, "Now I love others as much as I ought to." And so no matter how long you've been a Christian and how much you have grown as a Christian, you still have room to grow in love. The biblical emphasis on love is not exactly minor or infrequent. Jesus said that love is the distinguishing mark of his followers in John 13:34-35. "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another even as I have loved you, that you may also love one another. By this all men will know that you are my disciple, if you have love for one another." In case I missed it, in the same discourse, he added in John 15:12, "This is my commandment, that you love one another just as I have loved you." Then in case they missed it again, in 5 verses later, in John 15:17, "This I command you, that you love one another." The Apostle Paul frequently hammered on the same note. He said in Romans 12:9 and 10, "Let love be without hypocrisy. Be devoted to one another in brotherly love." Again, in 1 Corinthians 16:14, "Let all that you do be done in love." He wrote in Galatians 5:14, "For the whole law is fulfilled in one word, in the statement, 'You shall love your neighbor as yourself.'" He told the Ephesians in chapter 5, verse 2, "And walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us." He wrote to the Thessalonians, 1 Thessalonians 4:9, "Now as to the love of the brethren, you have no need for anyone to write to you, for you yourselves are taught by God to love one another." And, of course, he wrote the great chapter of love, 1 Corinthians 13, in addition to Hebrews, James, 1 Peter, and 1 and 2 John. There are repeated commands to love one another. The revival preacher, Jonathan Edwards, in trying to determine the reality of the many professions of faith that were made during the first Great Awakening, put love at the top of the list for determining whether someone's faith was genuine. He believed that the evidence of their love or absence was the best way to teach by which Christians may try their experience, whether it be real Christian experience. Would you pass the test? Or most importantly, would your family or those you live with say, "Yes, he or she is a loving person"? Granted, it's a lifelong growth process, and we often fail to love just as we ought to. But love should be your constant focus, and over time, there should be progress. In our text, Paul tells us, as Christians, we should pay our debts, including the debt of love for others, because love fulfills God's law. Don't miss that the foundation for loving others must always be must also be that you have experienced God's love in Jesus Christ. Romans 8:35-39. If you try to love others when you have not experienced the love of God in Christ, you are just fooling yourself. You mistakenly think that your good deeds will commend you to God. But the Bible is clear that by nature we are all selfish. Romans 3:10-18. Our attempts to love one another are based off of wrong motives. We may love others because we want to get something from them or because what love does for us. It's only after we have come to the cross as guilty sinners and received God's gift of eternal life that we have the capacity to deny ourselves and to love others as we should. Only then will our motive be to glorify the God who loved us while yet we were sinners. Romans 5:8. As Christians, we should work at but can never fully pay our debt of love towards others. Romans 13:8. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. We owe the debt of love to all people. Certainly, one another includes those who are believers. But this commandment extends it to all people. His neighbor is literally the other, which includes any person. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 29:37, Jesus showed that the commandment, "You shall love your neighbor as you love yourself," extends to strangers if needed. It applies to people who we may not especially like and to those who have wronged us. We do not necessarily have to like them, but we do need to love them. We need to treat them as we treat ourselves. We pay the debt of love out of the surplus of God's inexhaustible love for us. You may wonder, how did we incur this debt of love to others? They haven't given us anything to put us in their debt. We may not even know these people. We find a clue to this question back in Romans 1:14, where Paul wrote, "I'm under the obligation both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish." Under obligation is literally, I'm a debtor. Paul's debt was to preach the gospel to all people. Romans 1:16. The reason he incurred that debt is that he received God's gracious love while he was yet a sinner. Romans 5:8. Even so, if you have received the gracious gift of eternal life, then you owe a debt of love to all people. But you don't have to pay it out of your own meager store of love. Rather, you pay it out of the limitless overflow of God's love towards us. As the Lord enables you to be rooted and grounded in love and to know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge. Ephesians 3:17-19. That abundant love of God spills onto others. That's why I emphasized a moment ago that you must have experienced the love of God in Christ before you can love others as you should. You also may wonder why Paul does not mention here the first great commandment, that we are to love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength. Matthew 22:37. There are two reasons. First, Paul's focus here is on our relationship with others, not directly on our relationship with God. Second, he is assuming that you have been reading Romans 1-11. Thanks to my Wednesday night Bible class, I know that, where he's spelled out in detail God's great love for us, which is the source and motivation for our love for God and for others. The measure of our love for others is whether we love them as we love ourselves. In the past 40 years, it has often been taught that your relational problems stem from your low self-esteem. And because you don't love yourself enough. So you must first learn to love yourself before you can properly love others. But hopefully, that teaching is dying out. It does not come from the second great commandment or from anywhere else in the Bible. It came to us from worldly doctors who do not know God. There are only two great commandments, not three. Love God and love your neighbor. Self-love is the assumed standard by which to measure your love for others. We all love ourselves quite well. We all take care of ourselves. We give ourselves the benefit of a doubt in every situation. I've noticed that the guy who drives faster than I is a crazy person who is going to cause an accident. And the guy who drives slower than I needs to take some driving lessons or get off the road because I drive just right. If you rode with me, you know that is so not true. Since we can never exhaust the debt of love, we must keep working to pay it off. You'll never get to the point where you can honestly say, I love my wife as much as I should. I don't need to work at it any longer. The reason that it's difficult to love others is that it always requires self-sacrifice or self-denial. I'd really rather sit there and watch the news program or a sports program on TV than to get up and help my mom with the dishes. Besides, doesn't she realize that I worked hard at school all day as if she didn't? My mom's a teacher. Laugh harder, please. Or at church, you're so focused on talking with your friends that you don't notice a visitor who is standing there all alone. You need to take your focus off yourself and put it on others and their needs in order to work at this debt of love that you owe. I'm countering the popular notation that love is spontaneous and effortless. We talk about falling in love. Falling doesn't take much effort. And if we've fallen out of love, there doesn't seem to be much that we can do about it. But according to the Bible, that's nonsense. The Bible commands us to love others, which implies that we can do it even though it requires some thought and effort. The debt of love involves not only our feelings, but also our actions, both positive and negative. The highest good for every person is that he or she comes to know Jesus Christ and to grow to be more like him. So, with a total stranger, love may be the commitment to sacrifice our time and our comfort level to tell him about Christ. Love may be the thoughtfulness to recognize a need and to take action to meet that need without any request from the other person. Love may realize that a brother in Christ is drifting spiritually or is in sin, and so you take the time to help restore them to the Lord. In our text, Paul cites 4 of the 10 commandments to show what love does not do. First, he cites the commandment, you shall not commit adultery. Although those who commit adultery convince themselves that they love the new partner, they are deceived. They love themselves and mistakenly think that the new partner will make them happy or to meet their needs. But they aren't loving the new partner because they are not committed to helping that partner know Christ and to grow in him. They certainly aren't loving their present spouse or their children. Then Paul cites the commandment, you shall not murder. While most of us have never actually murdered anyone, Jesus pointed out that our anger towards others violates this commandment. Matthew 5:21 through 22. If you are angry at your spouse or at your kids, you are not loving them. Then Paul cites the commandment, you shall not steal. Obviously, taking what belongs to others is not loving them. It is loving yourself above them because you think that you have the right to own what they do. Finally, Paul cites the commandment, you shall not covet. Covet or wanting what others have is the attitude that lies beneath stealing. It is based on self-love, not only love of God and others. When I covet, I want what others have because I mistakenly think that it will make me happy. I'm not thinking about how it will make them feel if I take it from them. Paul is not exhaustive, and so he adds, And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as you love yourself. Since he has been citing the Ten Commandments, which are negative, he summarizes negatively. Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Thus, love involves concrete actions, often positive, but sometimes negative towards others. It requires continual self-denial in order to meet the needs of others. Self-denial runs counter to my flesh. Love requires constant effort and thought. I have to take my focus off myself and think about the needs of the other person or how they might feel or what they need. So the question that Paul is asking us here is, are you paying your debts? Are you working at paying the debt that you will always owe, the debt of love for others? Are you making the effort to sacrifice your comfort and your convenience to help meet the highest good of others? If you're married, begin with your spouse. If you have children, practice on them. We all have difficult members of our extended family who needs God's love, and we may be the only channel for it to flow to them. It may be someone at work or someone at school. Love's aim is their highest good, which is to know Christ and to be conformed to him. It will take effort and it will take time. But we owe such love to them, both in good deeds and in sharing the gospel as opportunities arise. If you ask, how can I develop this quality? Paul's answer is, walk in the Spirit. Love is the first fruit of the Spirit, Galatians 5:16 and 22. If you ask, how can I know whether I'm acting in love? Paul gets pretty specific in 1 Corinthians 13:4-7. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not jealous, love does not brag, and is not arrogant, does not act unbecomingly, it does not seek its own, it is not provoked, it does not take into account a wrong suffered, does not rejoice in the unrighteousness, but rejoices with the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. That is our debt to all the people. Are you working on paying it off? If you have a need, we encourage you to come now as we stand and as we sing.